I want to defer to my brother Mark to talk a little bit about the history of this issue.
Yeah, so I'm going to dive a little further into history. And where I want to start is really just about some attitudes. So James, I believe, mentioned Aristotle. Aristotle wrote that the line between lawful and unlawful abortion will be marked by the fact of having sensation and being alive. Before that point was reached, Aristotle did not regard abortion as a killing of something human. And I find this a little bit humorous. Aristotle considered the embryo to gain a human soul at 40 days if they were a male, and 90 days if they're a female. So I guess the male's got a 50-day head start with our souls. But before that, it had vegetable and animal souls. The Stoics, they believed that the fetus itself was plant-like in nature and not an animal until the moment of birth, when it finally breathed air. They therefore found abortion morally acceptable. I'll just fast forward all the way to the 19th century, the 1800s. And that century saw lots of advances in the fields of surgery, anesthesia, and sanitation. Abortion had previously been widely practiced and legal under common law in early pregnancy until quickening. Now, quickening was when the mother could feel movement. Now, in the early 19th centuries, physicians were the leading advocates of abortion criminalization, because they were arguing with their advances in medical knowledge that there was really nothing special about quickening. There was no big deal that happened when the mother could start feeling things. So anti-abortion statutes began to appear in the U.S. in the 1820s. Criminalization accelerated from there. And there were doctors, legislatures, the American Medical Association were all involved with this. But the physicians were the leading advocates for abortion. So it wasn't religious fanatics imposing religious views. It was medical physicians thinking scientifically. Now, also in the 19th century, many feminists of the era, like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, they were against abortion. They actually considered it an example, well, even the free love wing, the extreme wing of the feminist movement, refused to advocate it because they felt like it was an example of the hideous extremes to which modern marriage was driving women. So to many feminists of the era, abortion was an undesirable necessity forced upon women by thoughtless men. It was a tool of men and a corrupt culture. So this issue has not historically been science against faith or men against women. In fact, doctors and feminists have been powerful voices throughout history condemning abortion. But I'm going to fast forward all the way to 1973 and jump right into Roe versus Wade. This was truly a watershed moment. And in order to understand why, we need to understand just how sweeping it really was. So this next chart it's a chart of abortion legality before Roe versus Wade. All the red states had abortion illegal, period. In the one purple state on this chart, it was legal only in the case of rape. In the dark blue states, and there's a couple of them, it was legal in case of danger to women's health. In the green states, it was legal in case of danger to women's health, rape or incest, or if the fetus was likely damaged. And lastly, the 4 yellow states made abortion legal upon request. All you had to do is ask for it. For all intents and purposes, Roe versus Wade turned every state yellow. Now, some of you, if you know a little bit about Roe versus Wade, you can say, no, that's not true. I'm going to explain why, in fact, it is true. There are some major misconceptions about Roe versus Wade. First of all, a lot of people think, oh, it's a moderate decision. It wasn't really that big of a deal. Some people mistakenly think that it permits abortions only up to 24 weeks, and only in the early stages of pregnancy, and only after that if the mother's in danger. Well, if you look at really what it says and what has happened as a result of it, the story is really quite different. Now, for one thing, I'm sorry if this is a little small type, but it did bring into the idea of trimesters for the pregnancy. That was actually kind of really an invention of Roe versus Wade. And then under normal guidelines, a state has no right whatsoever to restrict abortion in the first 6 months. That's clear in Roe versus Wade. Now, in the last trimester, it was tied to the idea of viability. And that is the time at which a fetus can be expected or to live outside the womb with normal procedures like incubators and that sort of thing. And then and only then the state has a right, although it doesn't have an obligation, to restrict abortions to only those cases in which the mother's health is jeopardized. Now, this poses a problem for Roe v. Wade already, because with the advancement of science and technology, this viability has been pushed earlier and earlier. But since the court said that a state only has an interest in protecting prenatal life after it is viable, and since that viability line is going earlier and earlier, even Justice Sandra Day O'Connor has made the comment that if Roe versus Wade is that it's on a collision course with itself. In other words, if viability is pushed back far enough and earlier into pregnancy, the right to abortion will vanish, and Roe will cease to have any legal weight. But Roe versus Wade has one huge loophole: the definition of mother's health. And also subsequent court rulings have really broadened this greatly. The health of the mother includes psychological as well as physical well-being. And in fact, in other rulings, it's been ruled that the medical judgment may be exercised in light of all factors: physical, emotional, psychological, familial, even the woman's age. It's all relevant to the well-being of the mother. So in the book by Francis J. Beckwith called Politically Correct Death, he states it very succinctly. It is safe to say that in the first 6 months of pregnancy, a woman can have an abortion and doesn't even need a reason. But in the last 3 months, she can have it for any reason. So in spite of the fact that that's sweeping and powerful, Roe v. Wade is actually vulnerable. Not only do many legal scholars and lawyers believe it was a bad decision in the first place, science is undermining some of its basic premises, like I mentioned, with viability. And that's why pro-abortion advocates will stop at nothing to avoid getting to the point where it might be re-examined and overturned. As one example of the inconsistencies in the law, Dr. Charles Rice, who's a professor of law at Notre Dame, just 1 year after Roe versus Wade, he pointed this out. He said, in the 1973 cases, there were actually more than just Roe versus Wade, also Doe versus Bolton. Justice Douglas agreed that the unborn has no right to live. Yet, 1 year earlier, that same justice had conferred legal rights on, quoting from his opinion, valleys, alpine meadows, rivers, lakes, estuaries, beaches, ridges, groves of trees, swampland. The list is longer than that. Bottom line, so swamps and trees have rights, but the human child in the womb has none. And that takes us, I'm going to jump all the way to where we're at today. With the possibility of the Supreme Court, I'll say attitudes changing, and this is the news that James was talking about too, there's a lot of things happening with the states. The states are starting to flex their muscles, so to speak, in our republic. And this chart gives you a rough idea of how things are happening. The purplish states are where you're seeing state laws come in that are adding more protections. So that if Roe versus Wade is turned over, they're going to have state laws protecting abortion. Now, I like the way, I've looked at lots of charts on the web, and most of the time, the wording is slanted to be pro-abortion. So it's protecting abortions, restricting abortions. You won't find charts that talk about protecting unborn babies, but it's kind of a side point. So the purplish, the laws are coming to put in more protections, but throughout the center of the country, there are these laws popping up that are throwing, there's really a couple reasons for it. They're throwing in more restrictions for abortion, and they're just flat out trying to force the Supreme Court to take action. So this is real-time news. Now, how did we get to this point? How did we get to this psychological kind of fork in the road? And that's why I'm going to turn it back to James.